so that she looks after you in a proper Vaishnav nursing home. Great achievement for ISKCON. Thank you very much. And I hope that this it's something that actually resonates elsewhere and sparks many other temples to follow suit. So thank you very much. Yes, as was said, I'm part of the Bhaktivedanta Institute, which was a kind of separate but integrated a component of Prabhupada's plan for ISKCON. Prabhupada set up three institutions. ISKCON, of course, you know, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. The BBT, to protect his books. And the Bhaktivedanta Institute. Specifically, to present the scientific view of Krishna consciousness. Not just to academics, but to the public and to the devotees. To share this. And the institution was set up in Prabhupada's time, 1975-76. It's fair to say it hasn't been as visible as it should be in recent decades, but it is undergoing an incredible renaissance in the last few years. Whereas when it started, there was only 5 PhD devotee scientists in the movement. Actually, there was only 3. And 2 of them were just MAs. But now we have actually well over 100 active devotee scientists in all different fields, from neuroscience, cosmology, astrophysics, physics, quantum stuff. We have Murli Gopal here, biology, and so on. So we're covering a lot of bases. And as part of the brief of the BI was to attend conferences to understand exactly what is being said in the scientific community. And there's been a huge shift, particularly in the study of consciousness. In the last 20 years, things have moved. The old school ideas have been well challenged. And part of that is what has happened here in Tucson, organized by a gentleman called Stuart Hameroff, who's with the university. I got to know him 7-8 years ago when he came to Oxford, and we arranged a program for him and Sir Roger Penrose, and got to understand his approach. I don't agree with his theories of consciousness, although I think there is some of his scientific stuff that is very useful to us, but he is very helpful to the devotees. And for the first time, ISKCON and BI has been asked to present a 4-hour workshop at the conference. So that is happening tomorrow morning. And we have assembled a team of devotees to go over certain things. And I just want to give you, in the short time we have, a little flavor of some of the things that we're going to be discussing. Because part of the role of the BI is to help scientists understand philosophy. We're not disputing the science that scientists do, the actual data that they gather. Generally, they're very, they work very hard to try and, get it correct. We know that there's sometimes some fudging and some messing around, but generally they work very hard to get good data. The problem comes when they interpret it in a very simplistic, childish way, in a way that is not actually driven by proper philosophy. So part of what we have to do in the BI is to help scientists think philosophically. And we're going to do that today on consciousness, exploring consciousness. So we're going to look at some of the axioms of conscious experience. Consciousness is said to be confusing, but it's not. It's not really confusing. You all know what it is. You all know you've got it. So what's the big confusion? Let's just see what we know for certain about this very important topic. So here's some axioms. The first question to you is, do you exist? Nods around the room. You don't get the feast if you don't exist. We're not going to waste it on someone who doesn't exist. So we'll tick that box. I exist. You know that. And this is the one thing that you know for certain. Practically speaking, you might challenge anything else, but you know this for certain: I exist. No one can prove it to you. No one needs to prove it to you. There's no science, there's no philosophy that can establish this for you. It is directly known. It is pratyaksha. It is parapratyaksha. It is understanding the self by direct experience. I exist. Now let's take it a bit further. Why do you think you exist? Because I experience stuff, isn't it? I'm experiencing stuff. That means that's part of what it means to exist, right? And I am the subject of my experiences. And we do that in our language. I see, I taste, I hear, I feel, I like, I want, I love, I. Because I feel that I am the thing that is doing those things, right? You all experience that yourselves? So we have some common aspects. That's why we call these axioms. These are foundational understandings of what is going on with our own consciousness. And the next one, I am the observer of otherness. I look out the window, I can see the tree in the background. That is something other than me. I am viewing it. I am observing it. I see you all. I'm observing you. I even look at my hand and think, very strange looking thing here. I am observing it. I am the observer of otherness. And it isn't just for objects. That also goes for our mind. I am the observer of the thoughts of my mind as they float through. When we have more time for kind of workshops, we might take you through a meditative process by which you are allowed to just let your mind wander a little and see one thought come in and another thought and then another, and just watch the flow of thoughts without trying to analyze them. Just let them flow past. You are the observer and witness of your thoughts. They're not you. They're things you watch. So consciousness is the observer not just of objects and the outside world, but even of our internal world. And I am the persistent observer and witness over time. Aren't you the same experiencer, the same entity that thought you existed when you were a kid and who thinks you exist now? A lot of stuff has changed in that time. Our bodies have grown up and changed all sorts of shapes. Our mind has changed, our outlook, our ideas, our biases, our beliefs, so much has changed. Even our personality has changed, perhaps. But still, you remain the same entity, the same person feeling I exist now and I existed then. Think back to your first day at school. It was you there then, going through the happiness or worry or fear, whatever it was, the emotions. I was there then and I'm here now. The experiencer doesn't change over time. What consciousness is aware of changes all the time. Chitta, vritti, nirodha, as the Yoga Sutras say. That you have to try and quell that chitta vritti, the constant changing of what you're experiencing. But the fact that you experience never changes. The fact that you are the experiencer, that doesn't change. So these are the axioms. And we're trying to establish that if you're going to talk about consciousness, you talk about these things. Yeah, we can talk about neuroscience, we can talk about all sorts of biology, we can talk about all that other science. But if it is not explaining these points, it is not the science of consciousness. So this gives us some little simple systems that I have a sense of existence of me, and I am the subject of my experiences and the persistent experiencer. So those points, my sense of existence, being the subject and being the persistent experiencer, those define consciousness as the experiencer. Now, a lot of people and most of the philosophers and folk engaged in consciousness studies think of consciousness as conscious events. They think of consciousness as what consciousness experiences. But no, we are the experiencer, and what we experience is this lot. Unified, integrated events and moments. Events experienced from a first-person perspective. They seem to be my experiences. And this one's really essential, that experiences have phenomenal qualities. Now, when we say something has phenomenal qualities, or we are having a phenomenal experience, I don't just mean that it's really great. Phenomenal has a very special meaning, and we'll come to that in a minute. So the question is, do these concepts of consciousness as the experiencer and consciousness as what consciousness experiences, do they fit in the brain? The brain's an incredible little device, but can it explain consciousness, the experiencer, and conscious, and what we experience as consciousness? And here's a little thing to show you where the problem lies. You know this one, don't you? The floating finger? Everyone done it when they were kids? Basically, you get your finger almost touching. I want you to try this. I'm going to give you a phenomenal experience, please. Very close together, just a little bit in front. And do you see a floating finger? Yeah? Everyone, please get your floating finger in front of you. Maybe bring it closer if it gets smaller as you go away, but it's really good about this distance, a few inches, right? You've got your floating finger? Yeah. Now, think about this. You have seen the image of a floating finger with its shape and its color there in front of your eyes. Where does it exist? Where does that finger exist? Does it exist in the outside world? Are there actually little fingers that you didn't know about floating in front of your eyes? No. Is it in the eyes? This is not a trick of physics, remember. You know, like when you put a stick in water and it bends. That's a trick of physics. This is not physics. This is not to do with the outside world. This is to do what's processed internally. Because if you do it and you close one eye, the floating finger disappears, doesn't it? Because you're seeing a bit of that finger and this finger. And if you close this one, again, you don't see the floating finger. You only see it when both eyes are open. Ah! So this is to do with stereoscopic vision, isn't it? You know, it's the mixing of the two images, right? Explained by science, right? No. Where is the mixing happening? Okay, because it can't be happening out here. There's no mixing of the fingers. There's no mixing of wavelengths out here. One picture goes in here, but you know that picture doesn't have the floating finger. And you know that this picture in this eye doesn't have the floating finger. So it's not mixed in the eyes. Therefore, it can only be mixed in the brain. But where in the brain is a picture? Where in the brain do you have something that is an image with color and shape? What's the brain contain? Neurons firing little positive ions, jumping from one cell to another, creating kind of charge, moving in a pattern. That's nothing to do with a picture. The brain's got electricity, but you're seeing an image. That is phenomenal. This is the question that has completely stumped neuroscience. It is so important you get this, because it completely demolishes the idea that the brain has enough potency, enough capability to explain our qualitative experience. Let me take you through this. This is the subject of qualia. Hands up who has heard of this word qualia. Oh, phew, that's very good. Very good. I give lectures at universities and I don't get that percentage. But this is the most important word in the world next to Krishna, Bhakti, and a few other important Sanskrit terms. This is the most important word because it defeats the idea that consciousness is a product of the brain. And it was this conference 30 years ago, and they're going to bring this up again, that really pushed this thing into the world and why it has changed the perception on consciousness studies. It may not be represented in the media or even in the textbooks in school, but things are changing elsewhere. Because 30 years ago when the conference started, Stuart Hameroff explained to me, he said, you know, we started the conference and there was a couple of speakers and it was a little boring. Then up to the podium steps this long-haired Australian guy, David Chalmers, young PhD in philosophy and psychology. And he challenged them all and said, none of you are talking about consciousness because you're not addressing qualia. You're not addressing the fact that what we experience of the world is qualitative. I see a picture. I'm experiencing the world as a picture. You take it for granted. But actually, it's astounding because your brain has no picture. It's only got electrical data. Electrical data is not a picture. It's not in the right format. So qualia. Qualia are the qualities of our inner experience. They're related to the properties of the world, obviously. They're picked up by our senses and they're processed by the brain, but they're experiences that are in our inner experience. And the archetype one is the redness of red, the red ball. There is something that it is like to experience redness. We're not talking about a psychological effect, oh, it's warm or something. No, there's just something about redness. That's red, isn't it? It's different from blueness, isn't it? You have experience of blueness or experience of redness. And so all our senses are giving us phenomenal experiences. We're talking about imagery, yes. But even when we touch something, there is something that it is like, that it feels like. Sounds. There may be vibrations in the air, but why do they sound like something? That's quality. That's qualia. Why, when you have an ice cream, do those chemicals taste of something? You have to understand that physics, biology, and all chemistry cannot explain why you experience things the way you do. They're not related to the physical properties, and I'll prove that to you in a minute. There's other types of qualia, internal sensation. There is something that is like to feel hungry or thirsty, or pain is a big one. We think, oh, surely they understand pain, we've got painkillers. No, we don't understand why chemicals in the brain moving around feel like something to you. Why does your consciousness experience it as pain? We cannot understand. That's qualia. Or emotions. We can relate them to hormones and neurotransmitters, but why do they feel like something to us? Cannot be explained. Thoughts and ideas, they also feel like something to have a thought. Even your inner monologue speaks to you in your own accent. You know? Qualia are real. In fact, they're the only thing that you know is real. You have not experienced anything else other than qualia in your whole life, unless you've had direct experience of Krishna, which you may not, you know. But other than that, all you experience in this world are qualia. The mind's presentation of the world to you. That doesn't mean the world doesn't exist, but it means that all your experience of the world are qualia. And qualia are real even when they're an illusion. You seeing that floating finger is a real experience. It may not be there, but you're having a real experience of that picture. And they're ineffable. You can't explain them to others. And they're subjective. Not everyone sees the world the same way. And we've got to do this. Hands up, those who see the color of this dress as black and blue. And how many see it as gold and white? All right, you can discuss that over prasadam. I've had situations where fights have broken out over this. I was doing a TED talk, and I had to kind of calm the whole kind of audience down. They correlate with the outside world, but not exactly. For instance, the light on A and B, do they look the same color of gray? No, but of course they are, right? So now you know they are, you will see them as the same, won't you? No. But the light is exactly the same, but you're not seeing it. So the mind is playing a trick. It actually, that's the real thing. The mind is not presenting physics to you. It's twisting it. It's playing with it. It's making, sort of something that you can, that you think is real. And qualia are not physical properties. Let me prove that to you. Light, visible spectrum. You're told that light, different wavelengths are different colors. Isn't that right? Is a light beam colored? No, light doesn't have color. Photons don't have colors. And Isaac Newton recognized this, and he kind of said, all right, if they're all wavelengths or different colors, where's magenta? It's not in the spectrum. All right? And then someone might say, well, that's because if you get red light and blue light, you mix them together, you get magenta, don't you? Explained? No, isn't this the same problem as the mixing? Where does the mixing of color happen? In the brain, but the brain doesn't have colors. If you cut your brain open, you're not going to see pictures of magenta. Electrical things jumping, there's no color. Where is the color? It's a product of the mind. All qualia are products of the mind. Now, the Srimad Bhagavatam explains how this is all possible through the process of gathering the mind, gathering tanmatras. All of this can be perfectly explained by the Srimad Bhagavatam, but it cannot be explained if you think we are simply just meat machines with a brain that produces consciousness. So that's the thing that we have to establish very clearly. Consciousness is not a product of the brain. The mind is not a product of the brain. Qualia cannot be explained through physics, neuroscience, and biology. It's a waste of time. They've tried. And now many of them are exploring new ideas. Ideas which are actually influenced by Vedic thought. And the fact that we've been given this opportunity to present what are Indian knowledge systems in their parlance, and the whole idea of top-down consciousness, instead of consciousness being a product of matter, to understand that consciousness is fundamental. So that's what we're trying to do. So in this process, this is a little diagram that was done by Christoph Koch, who worked with Francis Crick. He'll be at this conference. And he showed this and showed how light bouncing off things in the park, the man walking his dog, enter the eye. And then they're processed, as little neurons firing. And they call them neural correlates of consciousness, little kind of data things. Then he says, oh, that produces this, the mental percept of a picture. And he made a little arrow. But the question is, how does that happen? And it said that the easy problems are dealing with the physics of light going into the brain and where the brain processes. It's quite complex, but it's easy. You can do it. But the hard problem that David Chalmers pointed out to the conference 30 years ago was you cannot explain qualia from that process. And worse still, you can't explain the observer. Consciousness, the experiencer, the thing that thinks it exists, you. The you that thinks it exists is experiencing the qualia. So neither can we explain qualia, we can't explain the experiencer, the conscious experiencer. A harder problem. And that's where it stands at the moment. But is it a problem to have consciousness? No. It's only a problem if you want to try and explain consciousness as a product of the brain. As soon as you understand, no, let's look at it a completely different way. Let's think of it that consciousness is fundamental. Now, before we go to that, I thought it was very important that I gather all the evidence that has been amassed over all these years by these guys, and I've done a lot of work on this. And I'm going to present all the direct evidence that the scientists have gathered to prove that consciousness is produced by the brain. Let me present that for you. I've shown that to many, many places. No one has ever challenged it. There's nothing. Nada. So I have to just wind up at this point. But ultimately, what we're presenting is that if you want to look at the science of consciousness, you have to understand there are three sets of functions and properties. There's the physical stuff, the outside world, our bodies, our brains. That's all operated by physics. No problem with that. But there is also cognitive, the mind. The mind acts as an interface between the machinery of the body and brain and the experiencer, consciousness. And when we talk about the observer, we're talking about the Atma, the spirit soul. People, sometimes when you talk about soul, they think you're making something up. Why are you kind of bringing in soul? What is soul? We're not bringing something imaginary in. We're talking consciousness. You know consciousness exists. You know you exist. That's where you are. That's the only place in this picture you can put yourself. Nothing, the mind and the brain, that will not accommodate those axioms, those things you know about yourself. They can't accommodate it. You need to say, I am the Atma, because that's the only thing that explains I exist, I experience, I'm the observer of my thoughts and the world. I am the persistent observer. I survive time. I observe the passing of time. Therefore, consciousness is fundamentally different. Everything else is changed by time, matter and mind, but consciousness is not changed by time, non-temporal. It's not a product of matter. It survives time. It's eternal. It's transcendental. It belongs to a different realm than the world of matter and mind. That's consciousness. It belongs in the realm of pure consciousness. Now the question is, if all of these belong together in one ontology, what is the source of all of this reality? A reality that gives rise to consciousness, to mind, to the world. What is that source? Is that source conscious or inert? That becomes the question. And if consciousness cannot be produced by matter, then you must assume that that source of all existence, Janmadya Shayataha, that from which everything else comes, is conscious. And when it is conscious like us, then it is not a what, it is a who, like you. And that who is identified in the words of the Vedanta Sutra and the Srimad Bhagavatam as Krishna. That's why we like Krishna. He is the source of all existence. He is the supreme conscious being. And fortunately, he can be our friend too. So I better stop now. I've gone into Arti. But thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glory to the Father.